Hello and welcome to the Science of Sales. This is a topic that's particularly near and dear to my heart because when you study with most of the wine certification programs in the world, in fact, when you study with any of them, they teach you endless information about wine itself, but they don't tell you how to sell it. And having spent 40 years of my life in the business of wine, I'm here to tell you that knowing how to sell it is the single most important thing you can know. So whether you're a master sommelier or a master of wine or a WSET graduate or a Society of Wine Educators, they all spend endless hours teaching you varietals, enology, wine regions, terroir, and the rest of this stuff. They don't teach you the one thing you need to know to be successful in the wine industry. That's how to sell. And the good news is that's what I'm here to talk about today. Pretty simple. There are two basic paths that I use to describe wine sales. Away games, that's when you call on a customer, whether that be a distributor, whether that be a retailer or a restaurateur. And then home games, you're in a restaurant, customer comes in, you're in a retail shop, or in many cases for a winery, you're in the tasting room, the customer comes to you, and that's a home game. You sell them on your own home turf. And in each case, I want to talk a little bit about how we measure success, because all too often sales is considered simply how many cases, whereas I'm going to suggest that the long-term goal here is to develop a long-term consultative relationship with the customer. May not sell the biggest number of bottles tomorrow, but over time we'll develop a relationship that will sell the most wine most successfully to the most customers. So that's really what we're talking about. Not how quickly can we sell 100 cases, but rather how can we build relationships with customers that will be beneficial to our careers for the rest of our lives. So the key element of all of this is that all too often in the world of wine, we learn about the product rather than the customer. And in my vision of sales, which is the one you're going to learn here, learning the customer is far more important than learning the product. Robert Mondavi always used to say, if you hire the right people, people with the right people skills, I can teach them what they need to know about wine. And unfortunately, what we do is we hire people who are experts in wine, but they may not have the people skills to really manage a good sales campaign. So rule number one, learn the customer first. The customer is the secret to any sales presentation. In fact, one of the things I like to say is that it is impossible to sell anything to anyone. It is, however, possible to determine, to find out, discover what that customer would like to buy, and then help them buy that. That's the essence of good sales. Not pushing something they may not want, but finding out what they want and then figuring a way to fit your product into that slot. So you need to know, what do they like? Whether it's a retail customer, whether it's a trade customer, whether it's someone in the tasting room, you need to find out, what do they like? You need to ask them questions. The best salespeople are not those who talk the fastest. The best salespeople are those who listen the best. So we need to ask, we need to establish points of reference, we need to understand who in the world of wine or in the greater world they view as credible, and then we need to establish our credibility standing next to them and sharing some of their perceptions, some of their appreciations. That's part of learning the customer. If you're going to do this, of course, this is where your education in wine styles, regions, etc. really pays off. Because if someone comes in and tells you that they really like Gruner Veltliner from Austria, well, if you don't know what that is, you're going to be at a real disadvantage. So you have to have this encyclopedic knowledge of wine to really be able to address any possible customer. But once you have that encyclopedic knowledge of wine, it's not so that you can tell the customer about it. It's so that you can understand what the customer is saying to you. The whole focus is on understanding the customer, not knowing the 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 intricacies of wine trivia. So the question isn't, do you know the regions? The question is, do you know the people? You need to learn these people. You need to learn their language, understand how they talk about wine, and share that same language back at them. What is communicated is not what is said. What is communicated is what is heard. And you need to be able to respond back to them in a language they understand using their terminology. And that means you have to have a familiarization with all of that. And of course, if you're calling on a customer, you look at their wine list, you look at their shelves, you look at their point of sale. You can ask their colleagues. In a tasting room, you may handle this very differently. We'll talk about different ways to do this in the tasting room once we get into that section of the lecture. But part of this is just doing your homework before you ever talk to a customer. You should find out as much as you possibly can about them. And you need to understand, what does Robert Parker like, or the Wine Advocate these days, the Wine Spectator, Sunset Magazine? Drinkers of Sunset Magazine consume more wine than all of the wine publications in America. But most people don't think of them as a wine magazine. Still, something like 8 million glasses of wine a week, but consumed by Sunset Magazine. So finding these touch points, understanding what people might be talking about when they say something, is ultimately how you understand the customer. And once you do, then you can take the position of, okay, I've heard what you said, I understand your taste, I know what your reference points are, then I can talk about where we share a perspective, then you can respect my position, I can respect your position. Now we are dealing not in me being the font of all knowledge about wine, educating you, nor are we you and a powerful buyer and me pleading, begging for you to buy wine, but rather as equals who meet on a level playing field to discuss wine and see where they have elements of mutual interest that they can move forward. That's the whole essence of consultative selling. So let's talk about how this plays out once you make a sales call. And again, I'm going to talk you through each one of these steps. But bear in mind, what everyone wants to really talk about is that bottom one, closing the deal. That's where the money is. That's where the rubber hits the road. However, if you do these first steps correctly and in the right order, closing the deal becomes very easy. And if you don't do these first 6 steps correctly, closing the deal can be really difficult or almost impossible. And so we're going to focus mainly on these steps that will prepare the way for an easy job of closing the deal. Let's talk about marketing first. We want to know everything we can about a customer before we go call on him or her. So who are they? What do they sell? Is it an Italian restaurant? Do they have an all-Italian list, or do they like to sell wines from all over the world? We need to know these sorts of things. Does their average customer buy $30 bottles of wine, or $70 bottles of wine, or $7 bottles of wine? This is the kind of stuff you need to know before you call on them. Don't call in and start asking questions. That, from a trade point of view, that's amateur hour. What you need to do is do your research. I love the idea of going into a shop before you ever have a sales call. Go into a shop, go into a restaurant, look at the wine list, understand what they're trying to do. See where there may be gaps. This is the classic sales technique of gap analysis, where you go into an Italian restaurant and they have Chianti Classico and they have Amarone, but they don't have any Nebbiolo. They don't have any Barolo or Barbaresco. You happen to sell Barolo and Barbaresco. You can come in and say, you have this, you have that, but you're missing the third pillar of great red wines in Italy. Those are the sorts of things that you can do before you ever talk to anybody. Do the research. Understand who you're calling on, what they sell, what their vision is for their business. There may be a reason they don't carry Spanish wines. Either their market doesn't like them, maybe they tried them before and didn't work, or on the other hand, they may not carry them because they're completely ignorant about them and feel uncomfortable selling them. Well, here's an opportunity for you to step in and say, I can increase your sales. I can help you because I can train you in these wines, and we can move ahead. But in order to do that, you have to have done this marketing first, this research. You need to know who they are, what they want, and how your product fits into that context, because that's ultimately how you're going to sell them something. To just come in and say, have I got a bottle for you? It won't work. In fact, the first sales call I ever made for a winery, I walked into the one shop that I had been told, we got to get in this shop and we got to get our Chardonnay in that shop. And I walked in and the guy looked at me from 50 feet away and he said, you're wearing a suit, so you must be a salesman. And I said, yes, I am. And he said, you better not have a damn Napa Valley Chardonnay, because the last thing I need is another Napa Valley Chardonnay. I need one of those like I need another hole in my head. And I said, I'll come back some other time. I hadn't done my homework. I didn't understand what his store was about. I didn't see that he was overstocked in Napa Valley Chardonnays, and I went in there foolishly, not doing my homework, and all I could do is gracefully exit and come back another day. The smart people do their homework first. I learned right off the bat, that's what you need to do. And with the trade, when you're calling on them, you obviously need to play by their rules. They will have protocols. Some people will only talk to buyers, or rather to salesmen, between 9 and 12 on Tuesday mornings, and you get your time slot of 15 minutes. Okay, fine. That's part of how you do your research, is to understand how each one of these buyers works, what's the best time, and it's their ballpark. They get to set the rules. So you need to understand those, learn from other salespeople. Sometimes they'll tell you. Simply call up and ask politely, what's the best way to proceed? But the goal here is to lay out the groundwork. It's like dating. The goal of a date, anytime you're dating someone that you really like, you really have only one goal for that date, and that is to get a second date. So your job in every meeting with every customer is to leave that door open to say, I'll see you in 10 days, I'll see you in 2 weeks, I'll see you next month. But always leave that door open, because you're doing things according to their rules. First rule, ask for permission. And then research the landmines. Now, I call them landmines because there are times when you're talking to the trade when you will discover they have very strong opinions about something. They've had a negative experience with something you may be selling. You need to know that before you try to push that on them. So one of the things you should start with is not only how are you, find out if they're having a good day, but what do you know about my winery? Have you tasted the wines before? Have you met the winemaker or the owner? You need to get a sense of where they stand in all of this before you go in and simply say, well, this is the greatest wine you've ever had. It probably isn't the greatest wine you've ever had. And if they had a negative experience, if your winemaker ran away with their ex-wife, that's not a scenario that you're going to solve overnight. So you need to research the landmines, and you need to go in and ask, how are you doing? What do you know? This is your opportunity. You're giving the person an opportunity to say, you know, I've had a problem, or, you know, there's one thing I didn't like, or equally well, there's one thing I love about the way you guys do business. Let them talk. You listen. That's the job. That's how you move into this kind of relationship. Particularly in the trade, never skirt the truth. If you ever tell someone something that isn't true, I guarantee you, sooner or later, it will come back and bite you in the worst possible way. You've got to deliver on your promises. If you say the wine will be there Thursday, if you have to drive it to them overnight in your car, that's what you do, because you have to live up to your promises. You have to admit if you make a mistake, I'm sorry, call it out immediately. I made a mistake. The wine's $144 a case. It's not $120 a case. It's my bad. What can I do to fix it? But you have to take ownership of the relationship, and that means being a grown-up. It means never telling someone something that isn't true, delivering on your promises, because again, like a date, the ultimate goal is that you want this person to trust you for the long term. That's the relationship you're building, and that's how you build that relationship. But as you're researching, as you're asking questions, as you're learning about your customer, every one of these questions is an opportunity for you to respond with a comment that indicates that you have heard the customer, you understand the customer, and you are building a sense that you may possibly have similar perceptions on a lot of things. Whether it's how are you, whether it's what do you know about my wine? Well, I know you make Chardonnay. Yeah, that's our famous wine. Absolutely right. All the time, what you're looking for are areas where you can say, I share that perspective with you. You and I are similar in that way. What you're doing is laying the foundation for a long-term relationship. Have you tasted us? Did you meet our winemaker? Yes, she was in here 3 weeks ago. Oh, my bad. I should have known that. But then talk about what did you think of her? Yes, she's really very brilliant, or yes, she really likes to use oak in the Chardonnay. Whatever it is, one of the things you want to say to them is yes, but you also want them, as you're saying yes, to say, I not only agree with you, but I share your opinions. Ultimately, I hear and I understand what you're saying. That's the foundation of any relationship. So now let's talk about how you move from getting to know you to let's taste some wines. And let's start talking about selling. Now that you've established some rapport, now that you've established this sense that you agree on a few things, that's the opportunity you have to now say, let's talk about a couple of ideas I have, a couple of wines I've brought for you to taste. I have a new varietal that I think might fit into your restaurant, or I have a wine from a new region that might fit on your list. All of those sorts of things. Now that you have some sense of who they are and how they're going to respond to this stuff, you can more effectively tailor your sales into what that person is actually saying. It is important to know that when you're selling someone something, you have to get them to say yes at least twice before you actually try to close a deal. So anytime they say something and you can get them to agree with you, isn't that a wonderful wine? Even pointing out other items in their store, doesn't that champagne display move a lot of product? Yes, it does. The fact that you're getting him to say yes or her to say yes means that you are getting them involved in the process. It means you're establishing the rapport, and the more they say yes, the more likely they are when you say, do you want to buy a bottle of wine? They're going to say yes as well. So all of these are those carefully laid steps, one by one. It's taking me 20 minutes to explain this, but this really happens in 5 minutes in a sales call. But you have to sort of check off these boxes in order to really get down to what you want to do, which is sell. Now, once they're moving in that direction, okay, yes, good, yeah, you can talk to me about that wine. Now you have to give them the sense of what the payoff is. And the payoff is not only that the wine is delicious, but the payoffs are, how are they going to make money? Don't ever make the mistake of believing that wine retailers, restaurateurs, or distributors carry wines because they like them. They carry them because they want to sell them at a profit. And they want that profit to be as big as possible and as quick as possible. So yes, isn't it delicious is all well and good, but it's more important, let me tell you how I'm going to help you sell this wine in your store, or let me tell you how I'm going to help you sell this wine in your market. And at the same time, can you imagine, let's talk about where this is going to be stocked on the shelves, how fast it will move, how people will like it. All of those things are opportunities for you to indicate you understand their business. You're helping them move forward in their business. You're giving them an increased opportunity for success. That's what you're really doing. Because if you think you're just selling them wine, you will not be successful. If you are giving them the opportunity to succeed in their business, now they're interested. And ultimately, every one of these questions you will notice boils down to, don't you agree with me on this? And that's all aimed at getting the customer to say yes a few times. Getting them to say yes, key part to closing the deal. Because that's what we do next. Once you've got them to say, yeah, I think that's an interesting product, then the question is, okay, So how many of these do you want? Do you want me to also add the Merlot in with the Zinfandel? I've got a special deal on something else. But now you've established that you're going to do some business. There's really a question of how much business are you going to do? And for a restaurant, it may be we can give you a discount on as few as 6 bottles. For a big retailer, it may be let's talk about 20 cases or 100 cases. So depending on the customer, you are then going to start putting together a package that indicates that you're listening to them, but it also shows them that you're willing to negotiate a little bit and get them to sign on the dotted line, because closing the deal, all the rest of this has been feeling good, building trust, laying the foundation. Once all of that is built, now it's time to start putting things down in ink, on paper, black and white. How many bottles, how much money, this is closing the deal. But if you go in right off the bat and say, here's the order form, let's start filling it out, you haven't done the steps you need to really put yourself or them in the best position to do the best job of selling them the wine. And you won't close as many deals, and the deals you close won't be as big as if you go through these steps and work through to the very end. Does that make sense? We'll talk about it another way. Let's talk about you in a tasting room, or you as a sommelier in a restaurant, or a wine shop owner. It's the same process, slightly different applications, but it is absolutely the same process, and it's the same 6 steps. So let's start with marketing. Key element in marketing for a tasting room, for example, is, are these the right people? If you've got busloads of bachelorette parties coming into your fine wine shop, maybe you aren't getting the kinds of people who are really going to appreciate those rare Burgundies that you bought and are hoping to sell at a profit. So part of the thing you should be looking at is, how are you marketing your business to attract the right people? And you need to find out, why are they here? What do they want? What kinds of wines are they interested in? And this is very simple stuff, but it's really important that you do this as quickly as possible when folks come in the store, because that's how you can give them the best advice. So the more you can think about and predetermine who's going to come into the shop, who's going to come into the restaurant, or who's going to visit the winery, the more likely you are to do a better job at selling all the way down the line. So that gets back to destination marketing. It's really a different lecture, but it is critical that you understand that some of this marketing is simply making sure that the right people and enough of the right people are walking in the door of your winery so that you can be successful and sell them wine. Once they walk in the door, man, for me, I would like it to be 3 seconds, not 10 seconds. But you need to greet them right away. Even if you're far away and there are lots of people in a tasting room bar between you and them, somebody walking in the door, at the very least, you need to raise your hand, wave, and say hi. Because if you don't, then the question starts to be, the customer walks in, they're not greeted, and the customer starts to think, I wonder what I have to do to get someone here to pay attention to me. Do I have to get closer to the bar? Do I have to reach out and talk to somebody? What do I have to do to get service? Customers should never have to ask that question. That's your job. Your job is to say, hello, how are you? Immediately. Make them feel recognized, noticed, appreciated, because that's opening the door to everything else that follows. So right off the bat, hello, come on in, nice to see you. That's a critical element of customer service, and it's a critical element to laying the foundation for sales in the future. And then we do exactly the same kind of research. But whereas with a wine, when we're selling to the trade, we can do a lot of this research either online or with a physical visit. Here we have to deal with people walking in the door, and we kind of need to do it on the fly. So you need to know, how are you? Where are you from? What wineries have you visited? That's a really key question, because it tells you a couple of things. It tells you not only where they've been, of course, and maybe you may find someone say, this is the first winery I've ever been to. Good information to have. Or we stopped at Stag's Leap to get the cab. We stopped at Pine Ridge to get the Chenin blend that we like. And we stopped at Darius to pick up some Syrah. And we're headed up to Sinsky to get some Pinot. And you think, okay, these people are deadly serious wine people. So if that's the case, I'm going to talk to them very differently than the person who says, well, we stopped at a winery down the road. You know, the one with the big tree in front of it? So they're a different kind of customer. I'm not going to tell you that that last group is going to buy less wine, because sometimes they'll buy more wine. But obviously, asking this question then elicits the kind of information you need to talk to them in the right way. I always say one of the most difficult things in the difficult jobs in the wine industry is someone walks into the tasting room, and it could be the first winery they've ever visited, or it could be a master of wine, and you don't know until you start asking questions. And boy, those people require a very different kind of treatment. So absolutely, in the first 10, 15 seconds, you've got to work through, these questions to find out, who is this, what are they interested in, and how can I help them? Again, impossible to sell anybody anything until you find out what they like. So your showing interest in the customer is also giving you the insight you need to sell them what they want. And again, salespeople are not fast talkers. Salespeople are effective listeners. So instead of saying, come on in, boy, do we have great wines for you today, what you should say is, come on in and tell me a little about yourself. What are you interested in? Have you been to the Napa Valley before? Do you like Chenin Blanc? Whatever it is, talk to them, find out a little about them, all the time filing this information away so that you can then come back and say, well, you said earlier, and then you can sell them what they really want to buy. And just like with the trade, every answer to these questions is an opportunity to build rapport. How are you? Oh, great, we're on vacation. And isn't it a beautiful day? They're saying yes, you're saying yes, everybody happy. Where are you from? Oh, we're from Chicago. Oh, my parents grew up in Chicago. Ah, okay. What you're doing is finding touchstones. You're finding these elements that you have in common that allow you to build some kind of structure. That structure is the relationship that you want with this customer. We talked already about where have you visited, what kind of wines do you like, and a lot of times they may be as generic as, well, we prefer red wines, or, well, we really don't like red wines. But you may also find people who go into great detail about what they really love. All of that is important information, but it ultimately doesn't matter what they say. What matters is that you understand them and say, I hear you, I get it, and I'm going to now take that information and try to tailor my presentation to you in a way that will absolutely touch on these points and reach deep into what you want to buy. One point I really want to make clear here, and this is both for calling on the trade or anyone else, you should never criticize your management or your products. You should never criticize your competitors. Remember, for your customers, you're an ambassador for the entire wine industry. And when you start talking about things that are wrong in the world of wine, what you end up doing is telling people, gosh, the wine industry isn't all that great. They've got to be careful. They could end up dealing with some unpleasant people. And nobody wants to live in that world. People want to live in a world where the wines are good, the people are decent, and everything is pleasant. So the more you criticize, whether it be your own management, whether it be a competitor, whether it be, Napa is great, but I'm not so wild about Sonoma. I'm sorry, that doesn't convince anyone. What it does do is tell them you're rather small-minded, and remember that an ambassador is the person they call when there's a crisis. You want to have that kind of relationship with your customers when they are confused, when they don't know an answer. If you're doing a good job, you will get calls from people saying, hey, I had a question. Hey, had an odd situation the other day. Want to get your take on that. If you're getting those kinds of calls from your customers, you're doing a great job. Now we're back to that concept of, I always think of these sales meetings a little bit as two people on a date, on a blind date, and they walk towards each other on the sidewalk. And that first hello, how are you? They're still facing each other from 6 feet away and sort of talking. And as they talk back and forth, they begin to develop a rapport. Ooh, I like your jacket. Oh, thank you. I bought it at Nordstrom. Oh, I love to shop at Nordstrom. Okay, we're finding some points in common. This is all good. And then there comes a point where instead of facing each other, one of them says, well, shall we go get a cup of coffee? And they start walking together, the same direction together. And that's really what you want to do in selling wine. Once you meet them, once you've done your research, once you've established those touch points and that rapport, then the next step is, okay, now let's start moving in the direction of talking about me selling and you buying wine. So would you like to taste some? Are you having a good time? Isn't that a wonderful wine? Again, looking for ways that we can get them to say yes. And anytime you can notice one of your customers saying, this is good, or just saying something to one of the other members of their group about it, that's a great point to say, oh, I really agree with you on that. Now you're bringing the whole group into this conversation that builds rapport, builds relationship, and ultimately, gosh, we all agree on a lot of things. And when I suggest something, you're going to take my advice because we've already established that we agree on a lot of these key items. And then as they taste more, you start giving them examples of how they can use this product. Wouldn't it be good with a steak? Can you imagine that? You said you were going out to an Indian dinner tonight. Wouldn't this Riesling really work well with this spicy Indian food? You're pulling things out that you've learned, you're applying them to the wine, and ultimately you're giving them one more chance to say, yes, I agree with you, but you're also giving them the impetus to say, ooh, yeah, we should probably get another bottle. Okay? And then finally, closing the deal. Same process here as it was with the trade. How many of those would you like? Should I add a bottle of the dessert wine with you? Do you want to taste something that's a little exciting and different? All of those sorts of things. Now this is where you're putting things down in black and white. You've already agreed your friends. You agree on many of the topics you've discussed today. And now it's a question of taking that relationship and saying, now that we have a relationship built on trust and rapport, what can I sell you that you're going to like, and how much of it would you like? Always with the goal that the single most valuable customer is not one who buys a case of wine, but rather who comes back 3, 6, 12 times a year and buys more wine. And that means it's a customer who trusts you, who likes you, and has this vision of you, not as a salesperson, but as a consultant. And that's where we get this term consultative selling. Your job is to become a consultant to the buyer, always keeping their best interest at heart rather than simply a fast-talking salesman who's pushing product. So how do we measure success? In the number of appointments you make when you are calling on the trade, the number of meetings you hold with them. Absolutely. You should track these things. And if you notice you're making a lot of appointments, you're holding a lot of meetings, and you're not selling wine, then you need to determine, okay, are prices too high? Is the product not good? Or am I doing a lousy job of selling? But you have something to measure here. You cannot manage what you can't measure. So you need a spreadsheet that tracks all of these things and indicates where you're being successful, where you're not being successful. And of course, the most important element of success is how much repeat business are you getting? Because the more repeat business you get, the longer term your success will be. And as you track this stuff, you can look at where you went wrong, which products are not holding up well in the marketplace, which kinds of accounts may not be right for your products. With that documentation, you can do a much better job, not only of planning your own career and in your own sales, but you can also now give valuable feedback to the company as a whole in terms of what's working, what doesn't work, and where we need to go in the future. I hope that makes sense to you. I'd encourage you to go through this lecture a couple of times, because it takes a couple of times to internalize all of this. But once you do it, you will find it works extremely well. And I look forward to meeting you out on the street, where you can come up to me and start asking me questions. And about 3 minutes in, I'll realize this guy's trying to sell me something.